Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with me, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's episode is Kristi Lee. She is the news director and a co-host of the nationally syndicated radio program, The Bob and Tom Show. Join me now as I go on the aisle in a conversation with Kristi. Welcome, Kristi Lee, my dear friend, longtime friend, and colleague. And that last part, colleague, we go way back.
Farther than I care to admit sometimes.
Let's touch upon that. You graduated from Ben Davis High School, correct?
Correct.
And is that where you got your radio training?
It is.
Your engineering, that's where it's all started, right?
Yeah, we had a great radio and television department. Dana Webb and Bill Wakefield were my teachers, and I always credit them with where I am today, because if it weren't for them, I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be radio. They were so incredible and supportive, and especially Dana Webb, because he got us kids, literally kids, out working in the market at 16. As soon as we could drive, he was helping us get part-time radio, gigs. And then this engineering thing, which is how we met, which is the funniest part of my career, is something that came way out of left field. Way back when, and this was 1978, they had a thing called the first class license, FCC license, and to get one, you had to go to Chicago and pass this engineering test. And he told me when I was a senior, going into my senior year, he goes, "You ought to get this license." And I go, "Why? I don't want to be an engineer." At that time, I wanted to be a sports reporter. That's what I wanted to do. And he goes, "I just think it might really be good for you to have it." Now, you have to recall, Tom, this was 1978, and EOE was just kicking in, and I think he saw something for me I didn't. So I spent many, many, many nights that summer, many days that summer, sitting at his kitchen table with his wife and his kids studying for this test, and by golly, I passed it. So here I am, a senior in high school with a first-class ticket, is what they called it. And I went to college after I graduated at IU for a semester, and I was really miserable. I did not like it. I couldn't even get on the radio station there. They said, "No, you have to go through a couple years before." And I'm like, "That's crazy. I've been working commercially. I don't want to do this." So I came home at Christmas, and I said, "If I find a job, do I have to go back?" And my mom goes, "It's your life. Do what you want." So I didn't go back. And I started working full-time at a little radio station at the time called WIRE, AM 1430.
Little radio station.
It was a kick-butt country station that was really doing well at the time.
Wire.
Yeah, Wire Radio. And they hired me to be, and in this business, learning everything you can is so important. And I was like that. I was a catch-all girl. I did news one day. I wrote copy one day. I would do a shift for, weekends one day. I would just do anything they wanted. And I was sitting there, and the phone rang, and some guy was on the phone, and he goes, "Hey, I hear you have a first-class ticket." I'm the chief engineer at WRTV Channel 6.
And who was that?
His name was Dick Pratt.
Oh, my goodness.
You remember Dick, right?
Of course.
And I said, "Yes, I do, sir." And he goes, "Well, I'd like to interview you." And I said, "For what?" And he goes, "An engineering position." And I said, "Sir, I've never even been in a television station." He goes, "Well, then it's time you stop by."
Interesting.
So I went down there, and he took me on a tour, and he took me upstairs and offered me a job. And I know the only reason he offered me the job was because I was a woman and I had a first-class ticket, and it was an EOE thing. I think he was under a lot of pressure to put a female in that department. So, Tom, you and I meet, and here's this little...
and I got in there through affirmative action.
See?
Same thing. I mean, they had to have a certain number of folks of color and women in those spots. So we were trailblazers whether we knew it or not at the time.
Right, exactly. But we wouldn't have kept those jobs if we weren't good at them.
Exactly.
And so I was very blessed that I actually took to it, and I was able to move up in the company that way. But So I was your technical director when you were the director.
Oh, my goodness. And, you know, I have to tell you that Mark Mullins, bless his heart, at Channel 6, he's been there now for like 6 years.
Oh, yeah, I've met him.
Yeah, terrific young man. I call him a young man because, you know, anyway, anybody under 40 is young to me. But anyway, but it has been determined I was the first Latino at Channel 6. And I've talked to a lot of colleagues, and there's no one out there who can determine it exactly, but I believe I was the first on-air regular person in the state. And anyway,
I believe that.
When I came upon the scene, yes, I knew then that I was going to have to work harder than anybody else. I had to prove myself. It was a lot of pressure, lots of pressure. And with all due respect to my fellow colleagues, you know, there's a lot of sexism, a lot of homophobia, a lot of racism, because I heard it, because I couldn't help it, because I was around all of these folks, you know. And so I absorbed all of that, and I thought, well, you know what? I was a gay man, but I was closeted. And, you know, I grew up pretty assimilated as a Latino, but they still, I sense that they knew that's how I got my foot in the door, and they resented it. So I had to deal with all of that. And yet, when you came upon the scene, you were a breath of fresh air because you were qualified, you were really good at what you did, and I just remember that you were so accepting. How could you not be, being a woman and understanding probably what I was going through? So we had a good personal and professional relationship. And I just remember when you sat at that switcher, we were talking about if we went on the air with our engineer, the Grass Valley switcher. For people who don't know what a switcher is, let's tell them.
Well, whenever you're watching a television newscast or a live broadcast of any kind, there's someone usually sitting behind this huge piece of equipment that has a whole bunch of buttons on it, and there's a person who, back in the day, the director, you, or the producer, you, would yell, hey, take camera one, roll this tape, take this tape, add this font, do this, do this, do this. And I would make that happen, whatever you said, hopefully, so that you wouldn't be yelling at me during the break. But now, I mean, a lot of it's computer, a lot of it, the director does it themselves, which I cannot imagine being a director and switching at the same time, but it's come a long way since we were sitting in that control room, Tom. I mean... Oh,
gosh. And remember, we went through all the generations of technology, the different tape sizes. And
2-inch, 1-inch, beta,
Were you there
film.
at 16 millimeter
Yeah, we
days?
still had film. Well, very few things were on film when I started.
Right.
Very few. I think there were two older engineers that I couldn't even... I maybe threaded a film projector once or twice.
Yeah, and remember John Bradbury, who was the floor director. Yes. We had a saying back there, saved your ass. You know, when you made a mistake, someone would cover for you, like, you know, and to go into that, it's a whole other thing. But John Bradbury, he really helped me a lot, and we became really close friends. I often wonder what happened to him. We grew apart.
Me too. Yeah. He's so sweet. He was so sweet, and he lived close to the TV station, like a couple blocks away. That's right across the street,
yeah.
Yeah, we had a long time ago, we had a small reunion in May. I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. But Vicki was there.
Oh, Vicki Lewis!
Yes.
Shout out to Vicki. Yeah. She has a new last name. She's happily married.
Yeah, Vicki was there.
We're Facebook friends.
Clyde Lee was there, and
the 70th.
John Schaefer, one of our engineers, got it together. It was during the month of May. I think there were like 20 people there. Some of the old engineers, and I'm terrible at remembering names.
Well, you know, you were a switcher. What was your technical title?
Technical director.
You're a technical director, right. Yeah. We called you a switcher. I brought up John Barry because we loved making each other laugh. We had this kind of comedy routine. We need to talk about that, where you are right now. That's kind of where I learned about comedy, working in that city, because you needed to with all that pressure around you.
Right.
And so John and I had this thing going. We called Channel 6 All White High. And we had different characters for all of these
I've never
people.
heard this. This is great.
And we had, like, you know, who was the principal, who was the coach. I think Dick Pratt was the principal. And then, you know, we had characters' names. Gene, who was your he probably mentored her, Gene.
I know who you're talking about.
Technical director.
Yeah, he was a technical director.
And then the audio person, Jerry. Jerry had this habit of sniffing. We called him Sniffer, and we called Gene Hooter. Hooter and Sniffer. And of course, they didn't know this,
No.
but we would make fun of all these people because anyway. But they were fun days. But I just remember a lot of pressure, and like I said, you were one of those people who I felt I could relate to and identify with, because I knew that you too, that your work ethic was based on you had to prove that a woman could do this stuff.
Oh, yeah, and there were a lot of naysayers. I worked with all men.
Yeah.
And, a lot of women coming up now is like, oh, you were... They were men. And men are different than women, and I was okay with that.
For anyone out there who doesn't know who you are, well, Bob and Tom, everybody.
Yeah, I deal with men all my life.
This is the Kristi and the Bob and Tom. And the cast, we'll get into that later, but, would you say that laid the foundation for you to know how to hold your own with men?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Those guys, and I have to say, at Channel 6, no one, I really didn't have any problem with anybody. They were all pretty gracious. I don't know if you remember...
Otis. Remember Otis?
That's exactly who I was thinking of when I first started. I'm only 5 feet tall because this is a podcast. You can't see me. And back in the day, these 2-inch tape machines were huge. They were They were so tall. They were probably 6, 8 feet. I don't know. So Otis, my very first day back in the tape room, made me a stool that I carried around all the time because I couldn't reach anything. And when he retired, he brought me that stool to the radio station, and God is my witness, I still use that today because I use it every day in my laundry room because I can't reach the bottom of my washing machine because I'm so short. Wow. So I have to stand on my Otis stool and reach down into the washing machine.
We've got to get that into the Indiana State Museum.
It goes into my Broadcasting Hall of Fame exhibit.
Well, speaking of, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
You got that when? A few years back?
A couple years ago, yeah.
How did you feel about that?
I was
honored with that.
So surprised. Mm-hmm. So surprised. And I think what I was thinking about talking about my career as I was driving over here today, and people go, "Oh my gosh, you're so successful," and I still don't feel that successful.
Tell me about it.
I really don't.
That fraud syndrome?
And I looked at, when I saw they put together, when you get inducted into the Hall of Fame, there's some very hardworking people that put together this beautiful montage of your career. And when I watched that, and it was one of the last things my mom got to see before she passed away, she was at that luncheon, and she and I were not particularly close, and she never really said much about me or my career to my face. To everybody else, she would say stuff that was pretty nice. But when she started crying, I knew, oh my God, I've done something. Maybe I have. And I looked up there and I went, I never planned to do any of this. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have goals set. I naively walked into this broadcasting career with just hey, Dana Webb one day when I was a junior in high school, hey, you got some talent. We should do something with that. And I just went, okay, and do, here, open this door, try this, try that. So when people ask, how do I do this? I say, just do it. Just go where you can, work where you can, accept any job.
Seize the opportunity.
Yes, I didn't want to be a television engineer, but I knew if I wanted to be on TV, I had a better shot if I were in the building than if I were at home sitting on my sofa watching it. So I took the TV engineering job. And boy, has that paid off over the long run. You'd be surprised how many times I've fixed something or I've been in a situation. I was on this is one of my favorite stories, and I'm going to brag a little bit. I was one of the co-hosts for ESPN2's X Games, one of the first years they did the X Games. And we were in Providence, Rhode Island. And I was hosting street luge or some sport back then, and the technical director overslept, and we were going live. We had to go, and the director and producer, fortunately, knew my background, and he yelled, "Kristi, we need you to get into the truck." And I go, okay. So I come walking in, I sit down, and fortunately it was a Grass Valley switcher, just like I had already learned on, and I switched the first 20 minutes of the show before the real TD got his butt there. And everyone on that crew was like, what? First of all, I was a girl talent. And they were like, what? And so that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, that paid off. That paid off. I'm so glad I knew. And you talk about pressure. I mean, this was a network show live. I'd never done anything like that before. And I hadn't switched in years. I mean, it had been probably 5 years. Well, gosh, more than that.
Muscle memory, it sounds like.
It was kind of muscle memory. He was really easy on me, too. He didn't do anything fancy, but
I love
still.
that story.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
So if you're out there and you want a broadcasting career and you don't really know where you're going to go, just do it all. Do whatever it'll take.
Chris, if I may share a little bit about my story, I think you'll enjoy it. I was in a series of dead-end jobs. I dropped out of college. I'd studied theater, so I had that. And then, I had met Connie Chung when I was a bank teller in Washington, D.C. She had just broken into the business, so she'd encouraged me and my fellow teller, who was a black woman, that we should think about broadcasting because we were both moaning and whining about, oh, we can't get anywhere, blah, 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 blah. She said, well, you guys should consider broadcasting. She planted a seed. And so the day that I was at a dead-end job, I said, God, what am I going to do with my life? And then I remember Connie Chung. She showed up in a little balloon. Consider broadcasting. So that day, I don't know what I did. The next day I skipped work and I went to all the radio stations in Fort Wayne. And somehow I got in to see Hilliard Gates. Remember him?
Of course.
Oh, my God.
Big
he was
name in broadcasting, Hoosier
I mean,
radio, yes.
And, God bless him. He sat me down. He was very kind, but really condescending. He said, well, kid, you don't have background. You have theater, but, it's not going to be enough. You have no experience. So I would say that you should go to a radio station and then sweep the floors and then work your way up into radio, and then you might consider television. I did the opposite. I met somebody who, like you, presented me with an opportunity to come to Channel 6. That's a long story, and I jumped on it. So I started in TV.
What year was that?
That was 1971, 72.
Okay.
I believe. I can't remember. But I stayed in that same job for 15 years, so I like to say I began and ended my career in TV.
We left about the same time.
Except, But anyway, so you're exactly right. When the opportunity came my way, and by the way, that was the name of my little show that I was on when I started, Opportunity Knocks.
Oh,
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Think about that name. Think about what happened. But no, I've been following your career ever since. And so when you landed on the radio on Bob and Tom, I thought, oh my gosh, what a journey. That's such a big part of your career, but I'm really interested in how people got their start, what compelled them to get where they are now. There's always the beginning of the story,
Sure.
Who made that happen. But before that, tell me about your family. You mentioned your mom. I'm really interested in that, if you don't mind talking about that.
She passed away. It was a year ago in October. Born and raised Hoosier, married young, had 2 kids. She was the woman that, the typical late 50s, early 60s mom who wanted more out of life, but back then, Catholic girls get married and have babies, and she was the oldest of 9, so she had raised babies her whole life because of her siblings, and her dad, my grandfather, rest his soul, was a total ass to women and put all the boys through college, but none of the women. So there were 6 boys and 3 girls. The 3 girls, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. My mother was a bright woman. She should have gone to college. She should have done more than been a bookkeeper, office manager, or whatever she want to call her, but very good at her job. But I think we butted heads because she was jealous of how I lived my life because she didn't have that opportunity.
Oh.
Took a lot of years and a lot of therapy for me to understand that.
I get it.
But I've come to grips with it, and in the last year or 2 of her life, it was very difficult because she had a stroke, a series of strokes, and was trying to be independent and couldn't be. And I was a sole provider because my sister had moved out of state and trying to help her. And we would fight and butt heads. And it was a very difficult time. And it's taken me I still don't think I've really grieved to that. Boy, this has turned really dark. But I forgive her, and I understand why she was angry with me. And I understand why we weren't the lovey-dovey, parent-daughter thing. But I also did not want that for my girls. I have two daughters who are 26 and 22, and we couldn't be closer.
You know, this is an important theme, though. It may be dark, but I think there are a lot of people who want to hear this or need to hear it because we're in the boomer generation, you and me. And a lot of us are going through this, losing our parents,
Yes.
and we're having to come to terms with forgiveness maybe, or just parting from each other on this plane and finding a way to just sort of make peace
Right.
and then move on. And, you know, I have a similar story. My mother, I'm cut from her cloth. I'm just like her. But I've always been interested. My sister, I have a sister, and my mother's granddaughter and my sister, the three of them were all the same. And so it was natural. There's this mother-daughter thing that you know
course,
about, right?
absolutely.
This psychology. And it's very unique to women as opposed to men. Of course, men don't feel, you know, much anything. I'm just
They feel, they just don't emote as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I happen to be, you know, it's part of my my artist thing. It's part of my being a gay man. I embrace both, right?
Sure.
But, you know, sometimes sensitivity can be a blessing and a curse. Don't you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So your mom and you, did you have like an understanding when she passed? Or
I want to think that we did. I was there with her. She was right here at Methodist or IU now, whatever they call it. And my nephew and I were with her, you know, the whole time. She was there for 2.5 weeks after her major stroke. She had a blood bleed. And when they called me, I was at the Ringo Starr concert in Florida. And I get the phone call. I'm 2 margaritas in. And the doctor is yelling. And I go, excuse me, I have to, you know, I found a quiet place. And I had enough of a medical interest that I knew it was bad. Yeah. I knew it was bad. And she had had some strokes before, some smaller ones. And he said, you know, this was the situation. And I was on the next flight home in the morning anyway. I said, I'll be there in the morning. My sister got there, and I told him, go ahead, do whatever you have to do. And so she hung on for a couple weeks. And for that first week, we were able to communicate. She was able to communicate a little bit, but how much of that I don't know if she really knew. But the last few days when she was in hospice, and Eric and I were there, my nephew, and it was just the two of us, we watched Good Bones. That was her favorite show. I told Mina and Karen that. I was like, you were my mom's favorite. We watched a lot of Good Bones, and Eric and I would try to talk to her, and we never left her alone. And I have kind of a dark, funny story about this. So she was in a room where it was one room, but there were 2 separate rooms. Like there was like a little hall, and then there were a room on each side. And there was a gentleman in one room, and she was in the other. And the gentleman in the left had no visitors. His family, I'm sure, were away. They would Zoom every day. You know, the nurses would come in with the Facebook. And these people, when they're at this point, for those of you who've never been through this horrible thing, they're pretty much out anyway. Yes. So you don't know how much they hear, but I believe they hear. I believe because I
there's
believe
some scientific evidence that
and I believe in a higher being and whatever that is for you. And I really think that there's. So around 5 o'clock,
sense still works.
Right.
They hear it.
Right. Yeah. And they just feel you, even if they can't. They feel your presence. So this gentleman was in there, and my mom was in there, and it was 5 o'clock in the evening. I'll never forget. Everybody had gone home. The room had been filled earlier on my side with my nephew and his wife and my sister's brother, my brother-in-law, and the kid. Everybody, grandkids. We were all there, and then everybody left, and it was really quiet. And this woman came in, playing the harp. And she goes, may I play for your mother? And I go, oh my gosh, that would be lovely. And here I immediately go, I have no cash, I can't pay you, because that's what I'm thinking. Oh, honey, this is the foundation pays for this. This is, don't you worry about a thing. So she plays for my mom, and then she goes, I'm going to go play for this gentleman. I go, do you mind if I go with you and sit in there? Because I felt bad that the guy was all by himself. And she played some music for him, and she leaves. And after that, I walked into my mom, and I go, Mom, I'm going to go get some food. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't showered. I hadn't left the hospital in days. So I went home, and I grabbed a shower and grabbed something to eat, and I came back, and I walked around the corner, and this man's room was empty. And I went, oh my gosh, no. And I had gone home and gotten my favorite quilt, and I walked in, and my nephew's crying, and I knew that's not good. And I put the quilt on my mom, and I go, Mom, I brought my favorite quilt. And I sat down, I held her hand, I go, Good Bones is on, and she took 2 breaths and died.
Wow.
And Eric goes, I know she was waiting for you, because my sister had talked to her, on FaceTime or whatever. And I looked at Eric, and after I started screaming. I don't know. You never know how you're going to react, but I was like trying to find some help. My mom needs your help. The kids that work in there, they're not kids, but the young people that work, they see this every day. They know there's nothing they can do, yet I'm panicking. Mom, wake up, wake up. So after I settle down and everything, and this is where my whole Bob and Tom background comes in. I looked at Eric and I go, if I'm ever in this situation, don't ever let a lady with a harp come in and play for me. She's the Grim Reaper. She killed 2 people within an hour.
That's hilarious.
I literally said that.
Isn't that funny? I was thinking, oh my God, talk about heavenly. I mean, that's what you think of when you're getting to the pearly gates.
Oh, it
harp
was
sound.
Yeah, it was beautiful at the time, but that's all I could think of. Is I go, Eric, don't ever let a lady with a harp play for me, because that means I'm gone. Oh, but anyway, yeah. So just
now
try to make
talk about
peace.
dark humor. I mean, that's my kind of humor, though, really. So.
Well, like plenty of that.
And we all have to have it these days. We won't get into all that, but I've been talking a lot. Let's shift gears and let's talk about who Kristi Lee is. Give me a thumbnail sketch about the Bob and Tom show and how that elevated you to notoriety as a broadcaster. Let's put it that way.
Well, when I was working at Channel 6, as we've been talking about for the last half hour, I also worked weekends at Q95, which was the rock and roll station here. And so I would work, Monday through Friday, 3 to 11 or 4 to midnight, whatever the shift was at the TV station. And then I would go to the radio station and work midnight to 6 on the weekends. And so I would work Sunday night into Monday morning. So midnight to 6, I did that fabulous shift that no one listens to. But I had a lot of fun. I didn't care. But at 6 a.m., Bob and Tom came on. So I would be there when they got there. And so I just started hanging out. And I was just, once again, I tell young people, my bonus son and my girls, being there is everything. They saw me, they heard me. I would, hey, Kristi, come in here and do this with me. Or, hey, can you cut this spot? Or, hey, can you put your voice on this bit? Or whatever. And I'd go, yeah. Are you running out the door? No, I got time. I don't need to sleep. So this went on.
So that wasn't intentional. You were just being you.
I was just being me. I was still working at. Do you remember Barney Hobbs?
Oh, of course.
So Barney Hobbs was an old engineer that we had that I loved dearly, like a father. Mm-hmm. And he worked the Grand Ole Opry. He was a wonderful musician.
I didn't know that.
Yes, he was on the Grand Ole Opry for years. He's a wonderful guitar player.
I did not.
He was a
know
picker.
that.
Yeah. And he told me, I'll never forget when I told him I was working in the radio business. He looked at me and he goes, "Honey, that radio is just a hobby. This is a living." And I never forgot that. So Bob and Tom came to me and they go, "We want you to work full time." And I go, "I can't afford to take a job." I was a union engineer. I was making really good money. And I said, "I can't afford to take that pay cut." And they're like, "No, I really think this is, you fit the show. We really think you have, there's chemistry here and it'd be a good." And I wrestled with that for a long time about whether, Barney, if you're listening up in heaven, you really got to me, because I couldn't, the responsible me couldn't see past that, oh my gosh, I'm going to take this cut and pay. Okay. But I did it, and it worked out, fortunately.
By the way, we directors, so-called quote Mandy, really resented you guys made so much more money than we did.
Well, you should have unionized.
I did.
Were you guys union?
No.
I know talent was, and I know engineers
remember
were.
the strike at Channel 6?
Yes.
We walked through the picket lines. We got catered meals, and it was fabulous.
Yeah. But anyway, so I started on the show in 1987. And I have been there off and on ever since.
You took a 6 months break. I was reading your background, and what happened? I'm just curious. Did you get pissed at him or something?
No, Bob retired.
Contract or whatever.
Bob retired, and I was thinking, I didn't know what the show was going to be like without him. I was a little nervous about it. And I thought, and I had a person in my life at the time who was pretty successful, and it wasn't a money thing. I didn't have to work for a while. And I thought, maybe I should go out there and see what I can do on my own. Because as much as I love my Bob and Tom, and as much as I love my job, I felt like no one listened to me. Like no one, I didn't feel like, I didn't know personally.
You're a sidekick.
Yeah. Do I have interview skills? Do I know how to do something? Can I do a show on my own? And so I started a podcast. And
way ahead of your time, by the way.
yeah,
What year was that?
Well, this was only 9 years ago.
Still.
Yeah, 9 years ago.
Before most people even knew what one was.
Yeah, and that's why mine was successful. Well, I mean, I had a lot of listeners, but I couldn't monetize it, which is a whole nother story.
yeah.
I mean, it was, but I did it. I started it. I came up with a logo.
Where did you do it? Do you have a studio?
Had a
home?
studio near Eagle Creek. Brad Shoemaker is my producer. He did a wonderful job. We had a little studio right there off Lafayette Road in Wilson. And we did, we had a very nice looking studio. I got great guests. I mean, I look at my guest list now because I'm doing another podcast with Dr. Shoemaker at the zoo. And he's always asking for guests. I go, well, I interviewed him. And he goes, well, it was 9 years ago. We could ask him again.
Sure.
And I proved to myself, hey, I can do this, but I couldn't make it work money-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So the relationship I was in was not going well, and I knew I had to provide for my family.
No.
So I started looking for another radio job, and that got out. And Tom called and said, are you thinking about getting back in the business? And I went, yeah. And he goes, yeah, maybe you should come back here. And so I did.
Okay.
I mean, I got lucky. But I really enjoyed doing the podcast. I really enjoyed having people say, you are a great interviewer, or you know what you're doing. I just did an interview with Mel Raines, and Mel is one of my absolute heroes, and she's the president CEO now of the Pacers Sports and Entertainment Corporation. Mm-hmm. And she's such an interesting woman and worked for Vice President Dick Cheney. And I sat in there with like you. I didn't come with notes really, but I was almost in fan mode, and I couldn't. I'm like, questions, come on, think of questions. I was like, don't let this be a pause. Let there be. And I'll never forget during that interview, she said, that was one of the best questions anyone's ever asked me. And that's when, is this. Yeah. You're like, oh my gosh, I kind of know what I'm doing.
What the secret is, and you know this, it's listening.
Yes.
I'm listening to you. And I'm not thinking of my next question right now. I'm perfectly in the moment with you.
A lot of people don't know what that's like.
Yeah, and it's just like, of course, but I fall back on, quote, my technique and my experience. So I can do two things at once. I can listen to you, and then in the back there, I think, jump off to something else. Pivot. I know how to pivot.
Right.
And I've learned a lot from you and your colleagues in radio because, let's face it, podcast for many is like the new radio, especially for young people. They don't.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about the difference between, for those who don't know, explain the difference between a podcast and radio.
Yeah, and I know, especially people our age go, what's a podcast? I don't even, what radio frequency is that on? No. Yeah. You go to your computer or an app. I mean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I mean, there's so many places.
Wherever you get your
podcast, that's where you find us. Mm-hmm. And I still have them up. It's called Kristi Lee Uninterrupted, which I did on purpose because I'm constantly being interrupted at work. And I was sick of that. I was like, for once, I get to talk and no one's going to interrupt me. That. And now I'm doing one called Worth Your Time with Dr. Rob Shoemaker, who's the president of the Indianapolis Zoo, which is a really weird... We are as opposite of people as you can get. Dr. Rob is a PhD in biology and animal sciences. And here I am being a goofball radio host that loves music and comedy and the arts, and so he loves the arts as well. He's a big playgoer and probably more than I am. But it makes for interesting repertoire, if you will, between the two of us. But if you're not familiar with podcasts, you can get a podcast on any subject ever now. I mean, back when I was doing it 9-10 years ago, there weren't as many. You had the Joe Rogans and the Mark Marons and the Jimmy Pardos and the people that really started the ball rolling. And I was getting 20,000, 30,000 downloads a week on a show, and I couldn't make any money. Now if we get 500 a week, we're ecstatic because you as the consumer have so many things to consume. And that is so hard to break through. That is so hard to, as the kids say, go viral so people know about you.
Tell me about it. Here I am. It's been a year last week, so tell me about it. But in terms of the medium itself, I knew that things were really taking off when 2 or 3 years ago, I'm still a news junkie, and I still watch NBC and the Today Show religiously, and now they have whole features about podcasts.
Sure.
Top 10, and you see all of these packages on television, all of the entertainment shows, and a video podcasts. And so they're pretty much now mainstream, I believe, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing about podcasting, just like everything else, it got, here I was, a little show that could. I was sometimes in the top 30 of Apple Podcasts, and I was all my own, doing it all by myself. I hired a girl to do my social media to help me because I don't know anything about that. But that was it. And Brad, the three of us kind of did this.
So, but Kristi, naturally you had your Bob and Tom fans.
That's true. And that was the only thing that saved me, because I had left the show and people were like, oh, where'd she go? Oh, she's doing this. We'll check it out. So I did have that.
And when you say syndicated, when you guys promote yourself as syndicated, how many cities and what's the scope?
We're on over 100 stations nationwide. And then the Armed Forces Radio Network, so we're heard worldwide. And then with streaming, for those of you who are old like me, streaming means you can go on your computer or your phone and you can hear anything, anytime, anywhere. So we stream.
On your phones, too, though.
Yeah, through the app. We have a Bob and Tom app. So you can hear the show whenever you want.
All the major markets?
No. I mean, for us, a major market would be Cincinnati. We're about to go back on in St. Louis, a lot in Michigan. We have actually California, Bakersfield, San Jose. Those are big markets for us. Big in the Midwest, Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Davenport, Toledo. I mean, we're kind of all over.
Yep. Remind me who owns the company now.
Tom.
I know owners shift all. Oh, okay.
Tom owns the company. He bought it out.
And what's
he bought
it called?
From Bob. It's called 465 Group. And then
465 as in
the highway.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
Great.
That's pretty. And then we are syndicated and distributed through Westwood One.
Okay.
So, but we are getting back to your podcast. But that's what's happened to the podcast business. What's happened to the radio business?
Yep.
If you look at all the top 20 podcasts now, they're either Joe Rogan's network or NPR. I mean, NPR is like running the game on podcasting. So it's kind of becoming little men like you and I are having a harder time because the big companies, they have the money behind it, they have the promotion behind it, and so they're kind of running the show just like iHeart, Cumulus, Westwood One. I mean, these big radio conglomerates. We both know media's changing in the way we get it, the way we process it.
Sure.
It's just ever changing.
Wouldn't you say, though, but what satisfies you? Okay, so there's the money, there's all of that, there's the audiences and the numbers and all, but when it boils down to, aren't you grateful that you still, that voice that you didn't know you had, it's a gift if you're given that talent, because it takes talent, to be able to hold your own on your own show.
Yeah.
And all. Aren't you grateful that you still have the opportunity to do that?
Oh, absolutely. I'll never retire. What would I do?
Yeah, same
There's
here.
never, I'm very active. In fact, I joke all the time. I'm very active with some organizations here in town. I would just switch over and, work at the zoo.
What are some of those, Kristi?
I'm on the board for the Indianapolis Zoo. I'm on the board for Heartland Film. I'm on the marketing committee for Newfields, the art museum here.
You know what? My podcast, the mission is to promote the performing arts, but I have a lot of broadcasters on here because we're the voice of the arts.
I love it.
Those of us.
Dance Kaleidoscope, I love them. Yeah.
See, you're more than qualified to talk about the performing arts, and in some ways, I think you're also qualified as a broadcaster because it may not be a performing art, but it's pretty damn close. Broadcasting on camera, because it requires if you're really good at it, talent. You have to have some charisma. That's where
Comfort.
That's where the personality term came from. I always wonder about who began calling people TV personalities. What does that mean? And then you think of all the people who started the broadcasting business. They all had a personality that was one of a kind, right?
Well, and I think that's one we were talking about. My ex-husband was in the business as well, still kind of is, my kid's dad, and we were talking the other day about AI because that is a really scary thing for us broadcasters, because somebody could take this right now, this conversation we just had, and put it through a computer, through AI, and they could create Kristi Lee and do another show somewhere down the line, anywhere.
Sure.
I mean, and so we were talking about that and all these podcasts that some are being AI generated. And I said, but you can't, a computer can't put in the human element. There is still a human element, and people want that connection.
Does AI tell good jokes?
I don't know. I'm sure it will tell, knock, knock, who's there? But I mean, I think people, especially these days when so many people are cut off and are isolated and lonely, want that connection. And I feel like we give them that connection. We feel like, at least I hope they feel like, you matter. You matter to me. You matter. I want you to know that we're there every Monday through Friday. And
to do this work, journalism, why do journalists do what they do, and people in the business? I've been talking to a friend about this. It's kind of a cliche, but we're curious. Would you say that you've always been curious from day one when you were a kid?
Read all the time.
Yeah.
If you ask my sister, she'd go, yeah, she was sitting a beautiful summer day reading a book. I couldn't wait for the bookmobile. That was my best day ever, was when the bookmobile came. I lived in a little town called Claremont, Indiana, and it would come up to the gas station at the corner of 136 and Tansel Road, and I would ride my bike up there, and I couldn't wait to go to the bookmobile. I love
Claremont,
books.
that's for the drag races.
Yes,
did
yeah.
you go to the drag races when you were
not when I was a kid. Yeah. We would sit outside, and when they would be done, all the drag racers and the teams would drive by the house, and so they would throw us stickers, and it was always the day before school started because it was Labor Day. And so that was always a big memory, because the traffic would drive by and they would throw us free stickers and shirts and stuff, and it was a big day as a kid.
One of the things I've loved about what I've done, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, the idea that you continually are learning, that you're continually educating yourself. Has that been true for you?
Oh, yeah. But I think the other downside of it is you can't shut it off.
Oh, no kidding.
You can't shut off the news. And you ask my husband, I am on my phone way too much. Well, what if I miss a story? I want to know what's going on here. I got to do. And I do look forward to the day when I don't have to do that anymore. When I don't have to be constantly.
FOM, fear of missing out.
Yeah, I have FOMO bad.
I do too.
Yeah, I have FOMO. And I hate Facebook when all you guys post pictures. Well, I didn't get invited to that. Yeah, I couldn't do everything anyway, but I still want to be asked. No.
Well, you know what? My current addiction are those reels on Facebook. Don't get started with those things.
I haven't.
Those little TikTok.
No, I don't.
Oh my God! But some of them are so good.
I can't do that.
The comedy stuff is just outrageous. These kids are creating these 10, 15 second. They're brilliant.
I know.
Many of them are brilliant. It's just an overload, right?
It is an overload.
Yeah, but it's so satisfying, though, don't you? I mean, it doesn't stop, though. I mean, you need to have intellectual curiosity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I still read a lot whenever I get the chance.
You actually read books?
I do.
I have to admit,
I have to have books.
Well, you interview authors, though.
Well, not really. I can't do the Kindle,
I mean,
though.
you've done authors on that show, too, haven't you?
Yeah, not too much.
Not too, okay.
I've had a couple on the podcast, and we do a lot with Dr. Rob because he writes books. He writes books.
I want to talk to you about comedy. Tell me about your taste for comedy. I mean, we already talked about you love dark humor. Tell me, what is the comedy that appeals to you the most?
I like personalities. I'm a big fan of a Jimmy Pardo or Jim Gaffigan. I like comics that I want to get to know or want to be friends with. Greg Warren has a great Netflix special out there right now. Mike Birbiglia is a great storyteller.
You talk to a lot of these people over your
career.
a
lot of them are my friends, actually. So I'm very fortunate. That's the other thing.
How about the onslaught of women? Who are some of your favorite
Oh, my
women?
gosh. We just had Rachel Feinstein on. She is so funny. She's great. Kelsey Cook is a new one that's up and coming. She is very funny. Tammy Pescatelli's been around for a while. She doesn't get I don't think she gets what she's due because she's a very funny lady.
The Golden Globes host, who was that?
Oh, Nikki Glaser.
Nikki.
Nikki's an old friend. She is amazing. She's from the St. Louis area, and she is best friends with one of my coworkers. So Nikki is really blown up.
So women comics are only getting bigger. They're not going away.
Oh,
it's
no.
not plateauing. It's they found their place in the.
Nikki, to me, I love Nikki. Don't get me wrong. I love her. She's very good, very confident. For her to walk out there and host the Golden Globes like that, oh my God, go girl. Her comedy sometimes gets a little too dirty for me. And I'm no prude, believe me. I've been around the block. But it kind of, and maybe it's because I'm older, but it just makes me a little kind of, but I love her. I think she's very quick, very good writer, very good joke writer. I mean, she's at the top of her game.
Didn't you know Ellen back when?
Ellen DeGeneres?
Ellen DeGeneres.
She was on the show early on in her career when she was working the comedy circuit.
Yeah.
I don't know her.
Yeah, I mean, I meant her as her work.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Oh, yeah. She is a wonderful comic.
And did you see her last Netflix special?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay. I'm just curious about what you thought about it. She went there talking about being mean and all that.
I hate mean comics.
Yeah. Well, no, she talked about how she was accused of being mean.
Oh, yeah.
at
On her
work.
she stuff.
She brought all that out.
That's interesting.
There. Yeah.
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, I was curious about what you thought about that.
Well, I think.
So
I think we've raised a bunch of babies in our society. Actually, you know what?
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody's going to be smiling and giving you a ribbon.
I remember that from my days at Channel 6.
Hell
Some of
yeah,
those
people yelled at us all the time.
To get them to do their damn job.
Yeah.
Which is like, you know, exactly with all due reference to some of your colleagues whose names I won't mention, but come on. You know, I was trying to, like, do my job, and they were always sabotaging because, you know, they were lazy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's still around.
And then you get, oh, he's arrogant, he's this or that, or whatever. But, you know.
You had great hair, though, back in the day. I loved your hair, Tom. It was awesome.
Can you believe they hired me that way?
No, why? You were awesome.
When I showed up,
you were so cool. You're still cool, but I mean, that was so cool.
But you know, I have to tell you the story about how when I got the call from my patron, who was on the advisory committee for Channel 6, they were looking for a Latino who could speak English. Who, you know, whatever. I don't know that. I think that when I showed up, they thought I'd have fallen off a turnip truck, the way people talk to me, or a tomato truck. So yeah, I had to make a decision. Okay, do I go to this interview with Jerry Chapman, the general manager of the station, wearing this hair, or do I need to cut it off? And I thought, you know what? I'm going to take a big risk because this is the future, and I'm just going to go there, and they either hire me based on my background or whatever. But I'm going to keep this hair and see what happens. It was very risky. And when I showed up, he didn't bat an eyelash. He put me in front of the camera that day. I went down and had an audition. And I read a spot for some cleaners. I mean, it happened so quickly. And he said, you know, and I got the job. It wasn't like a full-time job. That came later. But they gave me this public affairs show called Opportunity Knocks. But yeah, I had that big afro hair.
You had great hair. It was cool.
I know, but that was back then when, you know, long hair was a political statement.
Yeah.
You know, people we work with are very conservative.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, you know, people are still wearing ties. Some of your engineers are still wearing ties.
Jerry always wore a tie.
I know.
Sound guy.
I know. But yeah, I thought, boy, you know, I had a lot of nerve back then to do that. But I think I started a fashion trend, though, too.
I think so, too. Well, I liked it.
Yeah, and let's see, what was your little do back then?
Oh, my gosh. I have pictures. I should have brought them. I had this really curly, like, I wanted to be Stevie Nicks, and it just turned out to be this perm that just went everywhere, and it was horrible. I was trying to remember when I kind of clamped onto this just straight hair bangs thing. But yeah, I went through some horrific short hair. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've had some really horrible looks. But
so tell me about the show these days. You're still, what time do you wake up? What time do you sign on?
I get up at 4:30, which is going to change because I'm
When we
moving.
worked together, I was on that morning shift for years.
Yeah, I did nights. You did mornings. I didn't.
Oh,
yeah.
God. It was, I don't know how I did it. That's when I was suffering from alcoholism. You know, I'm since recovering. I don't know how I did that.
Yeah.
I used to sleep in my office on the floor so I could be there for sign-on.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I didn't need any help.
Wow.
But directing back then, and I think you'll agree with this, the engineers always told me, Alvarez, someday you're going to be so grateful for this experience because if you direct live TV, you can direct anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that true?
I believe that.
Yeah.
Well, and back then we did the 5 o'clock news and the 10 o'clock news, or the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news, and that was it. And now they have 10,000 newscasts all day long, which got us into a lot of trouble before we did production in between the newscasts. We did some fun things back in the day.
So what time do you go to bed?
I go to bed around 9. I try to go to bed around 9. I'm usually asleep 10, so I usually sleep 10 to 4-ish. I get to work about 5:15, 5:30, go on the air at 6. I go 6 to 10 a.m. we're on the air, and I'm done at 10, and then the day starts with all the other things that I do.
Sure. And so what's the chemistry like now all these years later with those guys?
It's great. Bob is retired and doing well. I saw him over the holidays and enjoying it. Tom still is a workaholic and would be at the office all day long every day if you let him. But he has small children. Oh, my God. So he's doing still a lot of that. Josh Arnold, who came in and didn't replace Bob, but is in the room full-time with us, is a wonderful man, very articulate, very well-read, very funny, great comic, great comedy writer, great singer. And then Chick, of course, has been there as long as I have, so the chemistry really hasn't changed that much, except for the fact that Tom has total control now. Whereas when Bob was there was a little bit more of a cushion. And so now we always joke it's Tom's world and we just live in it. But we have other rotating people in and out, the younger generation, which is always fun. It's still fun. I mean, I go to work every day. I don't wake up at 4 and go, oh, God, I have to go to work today. I never have had that, and I'm so blessed. How many people can say that? Not very many.
Exactly.
And I've never had that job where I just didn't want to go to work, or every day is different. Although I used to joke about TV news, though. I could switch in my sleep because it really didn't change. The stories changed, but the format really didn't change. You remember how excited you'd get when we get like a new set? Or
oh my gosh, yes.
It was like, wow, we have a new set and we have new graphics.
Or oh my God, there's this thing called a Chiron now.
Yeah.
We have to have all that art come up from the art department.
Right.
On cards in the studio.
Yeah, I mean,
I think about the continuum of technology that I went through, and that's why at my age I'm not intimidated by technology. But at the same time, for those listeners who don't know what she's doing, I'm moving away from
He doesn't
the
like to stay on his microphone.
We're going to wrap this up, but I really appreciate you giving me your time. Let's go back again. You gave some tips to younger people about broadcasting, or life in general, about seizing opportunities. But what about broadcasting? And what do you want to tell young folks out there who may be considering a career in broadcasting?
Obviously, things are changing rapidly. And so, as we have spoken of, the podcasting world is just getting bigger and bigger. I think the key to making money is figuring out how to monetize it and how to make that a career rather than like you and I do a show, not together, but we do our own podcast once or twice a month. That to me is going to be the future, because I don't know how terrestrial radio is going to look in 10 years. I really don't know, sadly. I mean, I live in a bubble. My job is kind of protected in this little bubble, and I'm very, very fortunate, but there aren't a lot of jobs like that anymore. And so if I were a young person, I have one. I have a 22-year-old who's very talented. She has both her mom and dad's talent. And
does she want to go on broadcasting?
She produces a podcast for Purdue right now. And she works for Purdue Global, but she's funny. She's really quick-witted, and she could very articulate, can read, smart student, love to do it. But it's hard for me to encourage her to do this. I told her, I said, you just need to find a different path, I think. Maybe directing, or maybe writing, or maybe producing, or just something that maybe is a little broader, that's not so focused. Like radio news, I don't think is a job for her. I mean, there's not going to be one. I don't know how much longer that lasts. I speak at high schools a lot. I still go back to Ben Davis. I'm a big Ben Davis giant. supporter of their radio program. John Easter does an amazing job.
They have a fully decked out studio?
They have a TV studio that's nicer than what we worked at Channel.
Wow.
In fact, I think they have some of old Channel 6 equipment over there.
Wow.
And they have beautiful facility. And I do their alumni every year. I do a show over there on alumni weekend. But the kids are talented and they're great. And I've also done the Indiana High School broadcasters. They have a broadcasting awards every year, and I've done the judging for that. And these kids are so talented.
I bet you've given a lot of kids that people don't know about a lot of breaks, haven't you? Open doors?
I don't know. I try.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody comes to me and asks for help. You recommend
young people?
If there's somebody I think is worth, one of the girls, Marlo, who doesn't work in the business anymore, but I got her on at ESPN. I go, Marlo, you need to be doing this, and she worked for many years in IndyCar.
Isn't it fun to discover new talent? Isn't that fun? Yeah. Yeah, someone did it for us, right?
Sure.
You like to return the favor?
Yes,
yeah.
And if there's a guy at McDonald's at the drive-thru who's got the voice to die for. I told Tom the other day, I go, you need to go get him, bring him over here, and do commercials or something, because his voice, Tom, is so good.
I hear you.
I mean, it's just amazing to me.
I hear you. I had a server recently at Lincoln Square Pancakes on Meridian. His personality just jumped out. I mean, I said, he was starting a new business. I said, you call me and I'm going to get you on the air because you belong on television.
See, but the problem we have is, where do we put them?
Sure.
And so I think I don't ever want to dissuade anyone, especially if that's your passion, because God knows, I don't know much, but I really think that you might need to just think outside. I hate this term, outside the box, but. Yeah. But like I said earlier in the show, take whatever job you can.
Don't say no.
Don't say no.
Hear people say that.
And it may not be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to start working at.
There's always a circuitous path.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get off the. Mel Raines is a perfect example. She's now president of an NBA franchise, yet she started in politics. She never thought she'd be in the NBA, but. She followed paths and she took jobs that were beneath her at one point just to get a start in something new. Try something new. Try something creative. Don't be afraid to be creative. Talk about the arts. I mean, that's the number one thing. Being creative is just such a wonderful talent and thing that you don't want to, not use or explore or, just do it. And Nike, you can sue me. I mean, it's just do it. Just find it. Just go out there and, knock on doors.
Overcome your insecurities and fears to do that.
Yeah.
When I got into TV, you never met anybody as shy as I was. I still can't believe I pulled it off.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But you'll find that with a lot of actors. They have the public persona. They can do the public image thing, but, you meet them, and you've met people like this.
Comics are the same way.
Them, they're just so like
introverts.
Yeah,
I'm an introvert.
I'm an introverted extrovert.
I am too. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there you go. Well, with that, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having
me. I love
me.
your work. I love you, and if that's gushing, so be it. It's my show. I can do whatever I want. Right?
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Okay, see you down the road.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.